So we are now continuing really in the same vein, communicating, but more specifically looking at how you can communicate your carbon neutral steps on your labeling. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew Stephen, who works for Foodsteps, and they do exactly that.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and thanks for still being with us as your sort of fundamentally carbon-based bodies reach towards net zero of attention span left in the day, I'm sure. So I'm Andrew. I live in Kent. I've got 2 young children and we live just outside Rochester. And I guess for me, it really matters that local food businesses find like easy routes towards sustainability. And I care quite passionately about meeting local food businesses and kind of being as helpful as I can be personally to kind of helping you kind of wade through the various challenges. So doors always open. I first started talking to Flo last year about the kind of Food Loop project, and my background is I spent 5 years running something called the Sustainable Restaurant Association, which was based up in London. That was a sort of member organisation of conscious hospitality businesses, I guess you could say. But since January this year, I've been Chief Impact Officer at Foodsteps, which is a pretty exciting young business that's turning kind of food and recipe information into carbon footprints. So I guess everyone's done a pretty good job already of setting the context and the why, so I won't go over this too much longer. But I guess from a planetary perspective, food matters quite a lot if we're going to hit any of our kind of goals that we care about around climate and biodiversity. From a business perspective, I guess if you're a food business, without knowing, I could get my crystal ball out and tell you that the food you make or buy is probably 70–80% of your total footprint. So I guess that's kind of an area where it's really important to kind of make good decisions and get good data if any of your wider environmental claims are going to kind of stand up to rigor. And I guess the reason why kind of talking about food carbon might be a good idea as a business to your customers is that I guess people are cottoning on to the fact that their food choices over the course of their lives are kind of their most fundamental engagement with the natural world and their biggest part of their own personal footprint. So I guess whether we look up at kind of planet or down at business level or down at human level, I think food carbon kind of really matters. And I guess why all the labels? I think there's a number of reasons to put labels on things. I guess many large organizations we're seeing at the moment are increasingly opting into, albeit voluntary carbon reduction targets under the kind of Science-Based Targets Initiative and Net Zero. I think Compass, who are the largest food service business in the UK, have set out that they want to reduce their carbon intensity by 55% by 2025. So they're the people that buy the most food, and I guess they're trying to halve it. So I think fundamentally, when enough businesses move in that direction, the kind of modelling they start doing internally doesn't just look at nutrition and price, but it looks at carbon too. And then I guess for suppliers to those kinds of businesses, or I guess restaurants that are purchasing, it becomes increasingly important to understand and communicate clearly whether or not you're a low carbon choice. And I think increasingly a lot of the kind of supplier changes we're going to be seeing, particularly driven by kind of public sector and large private sector, are going to be kind of shifts so that carbon footprint is measurably lower. Obviously, there's kind of customer demand as well, but I think that's been kind of covered off pretty well so far. So a little bit about carbon labelling and what it is and what it tells you. I guess fundamentally, it tells you a couple of things. It tells you either that business has done a really thorough piece of work and deserves a clap, or that they're greenwashing. And I guess I'll try and tell you how you spot the difference. So Foodsteps are an example of a provider of carbon labels that I guess sweat the small stuff and care about integrity. So our clients are typically looking to us to be that kind of home for awkward questions or trusted provider that people can point towards when I guess asked about the kind of the data that sits behind it. Without going on too much of a kind of boiling the ocean on this, I guess what matters is that any product carbon label is greenhouse gas protocol compliant. And that's a kind of proxy for good. And to be that, it needs to include the whole life cycle, so cradle to grave. So I guess when you're trying to make claims about the kind of carbon that's in a packaged product, be that something on a menu or something that you're kind of, selling to someone else on a van or in a retail environment, it's important to model from farm to end of life. And Foodsteps are an option for doing that. There are kind of public source databases as well that you can use if you've got a bit more time. But fundamentally, what we turn that into is a score that tells anyone who's looking how much CO2, either per serving or per kilo, or percentage of your daily allowance that product contains. So we've done some sort of quite complicated maths around looking at what a kind of global carbon budget for food is and averaging that out down onto national diets and things like that allows us to kind of do that. We also give a kind of traffic light indicator of A to E that says kind of roughly where you are from an intensity point of view, and a QR code that allows people to kind of click and find out a little bit more. But I guess, yeah, at a high level, we've got a software platform that does that. There are others that have that too. And I think that it's really important if you try to do product carbon labeling to kind of fundamentally just be really clear on the link between what you stick on pack and the methodology that sits behind. I think, as Lara mentioned, Innocent earlier in that kind of piece about the kind of ASA regulations, there's something called the Green Claims Code that's been kind of up and running now. And typically the way to comply with the Green Claims Code is A, have done some proper research on the data, and B, be very transparent if you haven't. So there's lots of green claims out there, particularly in food, because it's really complex, that are largely using secondary data. And that's kind of fine as long as you kind of acknowledge that. And I guess a kind of QR code in this slide is an example of how we'd help you do that. I don't want to make this too salesy, but I guess fundamentally, we take recipe data and we put it on a platform and then allow customers to kind of download labels. And the reason that they do that is because they either already think that they've got some low impact products that they want to show off and get competitive advantage, or they're being pushed to by one of their large clients. So I guess another example of how that looks on a pack, and an example of the Food Story app that we create for all our clients. So it's a little kind of web app that people can look at on their phones. Typically, this tells a combination of information about either the methodology or I guess a kind of slightly more marketing-led story about ingredients and supplier origins. Some of the most effective stuff we've done, I guess when I say effective, I mean has helped reduce carbon intensity as well as just measure it, is when we provide these kind of side-by-side posters and data points for clients. So, who knew that, there was such a big difference between your kind of black Americano and a cappuccino? And I think providing these kinds of nudges in a food service environment is just really interesting and is leading to kind of real behavior change. Couple of very quick case studies, keen to leave time for questions here. But Time are a business that we've done some work with. They are kind of in retail, kind of pretty kind of trendy, delicious, healthy lunches. So we kind of went on a bit of a deep dive with them to do some sort of primary research. Many of our clients just work with our secondary database where all we need is kind of the recipe information, but Time were interested in getting kind of really specific so that they could make quite loud carbon claims. And we looked at kind of all the different life cycle stages, and something that surprised us was that 59% of the product's carbon footprint was coming from the packaging in that case, which is generally not the case at all. You normally see kind of food being above 80%. But they were using virgin aluminium, and it was incredibly kind of carbon intensive. So moving to recycled aluminium was able to reduce that product's footprint by 22%. Somewhat less impressively, shifting to British quinoa made a 0.5% reduction. But I guess they sell a lot of quinoa, so it adds up over time. And I guess this is an example of where having quite good data helps you make clear decisions about the kind of impacts of various kind of carbon interventions you might make, if you like. I know, wholeheartedly from my time at the Sustainable Restaurant Association that carbon's not the only thing that matters. There are lots of kind of interlocking ethical issues, but I think on carbon itself, it is actually quite numerate and quantifiable. And I think that businesses need to be able to make, I guess, pretty rational numerate decisions about carbon reduction if they're going to hit the targets that we need to. Further case study, a company called Better Nature. So they make tempeh products, and again, a bit of a quirky one. We didn't really know much about tempeh before we started. I think their assumption was that everything was going to be A-rated, and that was definitely their kind of aim. And some of the initial assessments came back as B-rated, and we identified that that was because the kind of cooking instruction that they gave was to put it in the oven for 45 minutes, and that in itself had enough carbon intensity within our cradle to grave methodology to nudge it up to B. So we kind of worked with them. They've tested a microwave-friendly version. I think, maybe it still tastes better in the oven, but in terms of what they've then written on pack, they're able to kind of get to that A rating. So I guess another slightly quirky example of how understanding it better can help you out. So I guess in conclusion, from me, a bit of whistle-stop one, but I guess, trying to leave plenty of time for questions. I think that, there's a lot of energy, heat and light about zero carbon and carbon neutrality. I think as a food business, fundamentally, food is made of carbon, and it's kind of challenging to adopt some of that rhetoric without kind of undermining your business's ability to grow. So I think it's particularly important that each food business finds the way of optimizing the carbon in its food, so that that's where all the biggest gains are going to be. Way before you consider kind of spending money on offsetting and things like that, that kind of reduction journey, it's highly likely that by focusing on the food carbon in your current purchases and sales, that there's the most meaningful climate action you can take.
Thank you very much, Andrew. That was fantastic. We have a few questions here. Chrissy from Romney Marsh said, does this methodology exist for non-food products too? And Max responded with, it's actually, this carbon footprinting is known as life cycle analysis. So there's quite a few consultants out there who can help people with that. But do you know of an equivalent labeling companies such as yourself, or labeling consultancy companies yourself, that works with non-food products?
Well, Planet Mark would be able to help you out, I think. I guess, I think fundamentally, when you're looking at carbon footprinting, some of it's quite easy and some of it's quite challenging. And one of the consistently challenging bits is the food, because the supply chain's opaque. There's not very good data about it. It varies a lot. If you're a restaurant that dares to put avocado on toast on your menu, you probably end up getting that avocado from 14 different countries as we follow the sun around the year, and the person that supplies it to you probably doesn't even know that. So there's a lot of complexity, and I think life cycle analysis as a tool is, I guess, a way of saying we capture everything, and it's quite academic, and it's very robust. But I guess the challenge with full life cycle assessment is that in quite an academic and non-business friendly way, it's only correct at the time of publishing, right? So you could get like a really detailed study done on that individual avocado, and then a month later you con somewhere else. I think what Foodsteps tries to do is to create meaningful averages from existing life cycle assessment data. So we've got like several thousand ingredient-led averages in our back-end database, so that when you as a business put in either your food spend or your food sales, recipe-wise, we're able to match that against a value that we think is robustly probably about right. And I think in the end, that's kind of probably a really meaningful first step for most businesses to take. I think once you've done that, the second question what you find is that, well, I want this data to be even more specific to my own business, and I want to make it show in the label if I invest 20 grand in the kitchen efficiency or something, and that inevitably requires a little bit more primary data collection that, again, we're trying to simplify. But I guess you embark on a road of a lot more regular questionnaires effectively when you go down that route. But I think from a sort of competitive advantage and sales perspective, the vast majority of food businesses at the moment are not doing kind of comprehensive scope-free analysis. The ones that are using sales data and spend data. So they're basically saying we spent this much on food, and that probably is about this much carbon. So simply moving down to like food class data and saying it was this much beef, it was this much beetroot, is already like so much vastly improved that it feels like kind of a good way to kind of differentiate yourself.
Thank you. Michael asks, have you witnessed any positive scores from the meat sector?
Not many greens, no. I guess we sort of wrangled with this quite a lot when we were thinking about how our labels look and work, in that, you know, to some extent, we're going to get some barriers to adoption if, you know, despite whatever you do, if you're a steakhouse, you're always going to be kind of like a shade of red. And we looked at maybe kind of per food class, do we kind of differentiate and say, well, that's like a quite low impact steak and that's a quite high impact tomato. I think at the moment, general carbon literacy in the general public is so low that it felt like that could possibly like take away more than it gained. I think what we're seeing in the meat sector, if you like, either in various points of the kind of value chain, is a use of this data B2B, and they're wanting to be able to kind of give their, you know, B2B customers good information about the sort of total carbon footprint. Not many are doing kind of on pack or on menu labeling because it's often not the right kind of nudge. But I guess engaging in this process can help still identify where there's like big opportunities for carbon reduction. And I think, you know, in the UK kind of dairy and beef farming, there's going to be a lot of change, I guess, in terms of data availability off farm that's coming in the next couple of years. So it's the start of quite an exciting time that if you wanted to make some kind of good choices about kind of low impact meat, there's probably going to be more easy ways to verify that you've done that.
Having all those data at hand almost screams of doing more food education to a wider audience. Is Foodsteps involved in that? Do you go out to schools, for example, or do you talk to other target groups about carbon footprints of foodstuffs?
Yeah, we're still quite small. There's only 10 of us, so we haven't started doing that yet, but always very keen to explore those kinds of opportunities locally through this network. I think we're often giving our clients the confidence to do that on our behalf, if you like. So if we're working with a caterer that works with 100 or 200 independent schools, we give them robust footprints per dish and quarterly reports that they can then go in and talk with some candor about and not be quite so worried about blowback from parents that, you know, are environmental engineers saying, what's all this rubbish?
Okay, good. Question from Sean. Until it's compulsory, won't this just be used by brands that are more naturally green or yellow? Why would someone do this if all their products are red?
Yeah, you're about right. I think that today's talk was very focused on carbon labeling. So I kind of led with the labeling side with what we do. But fundamentally, understanding the food footprint that's within your business is about more than just putting labels on pack. It's also about, I guess, being able to do your own kind of per customer reporting B2B or about your own net zero strategy. So in a sense, we see two key customer groups at the moment that are really interested. One of them are with quite low impact products that they want to do a labeling led route. And the other are with quite high impact products and they want to work out how they're going to make significant annual reductions in the CO2 intensity of the food before regulation kind of makes that a kind of key competitive issue. So in effect, you know, we work with kind of food procurement data as one like master recipe, and we can talk about how much carbon there was in everything you bought, or we can look at customer facing kind of SKUs and labeling those.
Okay. Thank you very much. Any more questions for Andrew? Please put them in the chat box and we will send them to you, Andrew, after the event. And then we'll put the answers in a document that will come to you after the event. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew.
Nice one.